and joining us here. I know there's better things you could probably be doing with your time, so thank you. The way this is going to work is, if I can scroll here, is we're going to have about a 30-minute presentation on historical preservation ordinances, and then that'll be followed by a Q&A, and we have a questionnaire that we hope everyone will kind of participate in and fill out so we can kind of get your direct feedback. There's also by the doors a collection of different handouts, things about the standards from the Secretary of the Interior, just different information you may want. And we also have a sign-in sheet, so we can correspond with you because we may want to develop a mailing list to continue to get people's input. Our goals today are to provide information and context regarding a potential historic preservation ordinance for Camden, and to encourage public encouragement. That's why we're doing this, because we want to collaboratively shape the ordinance. Okay, so who are we? I am one of the Historic Resources Committee. We are a committee that was formed in 1992. There's 5 of us, like a lot of committees, and 2 alternates. 4 of the 5 of us are here. I don't know if Brian, our 5th, is joining via Zoom. He's out of town at the moment. But my name's Chris Frieden. I'm the chair. We have Chris Fassold, we have Jennifer Gramata, and Danny Solomon. So we are 4 of the 5 members of the Historic Resources Committee. When the committee was formed, one of our duties, part of our charter, is that we are to recommend ordinances for the purposes of historic preservation within the town. That's why we've been working on this. It has been a long, long journey. We're going to get into the history of historic preservation here in Camden. So let's start with, what is historic preservation? Sorry about me going back and forth between my 2 computers here. But okay, well, I think it's best to just start with the definition from the Secretary of the Interior, that preservation is the act or process of applying measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic property. And then a historic preservation ordinance is a local statute. It's not a federal or state statute. It's a local statute that's enacted to protect those buildings and neighborhoods. And in Maine particularly, all of the protection of historic properties trickles down to the town. So while there are federal and state guidelines and standards, nothing is enforceable except at the local level through local legislation. That's why creating a historic preservation ordinance in our town and on our terms is important. Okay. Thank you for your patience here. Okay, so what are some of the reasons for having a historic preservation ordinance? Well, one of kind of the intangible things is that a historic preservation ordinance maintains community pride. It's a way to represent and honor your heritage and history, but it also protects the investments of owners and residents of historic properties, and it positively impacts the local economy through tourism and enhancing business recruitment. Currently, as you may or may not know, we only have a 120-day demolition delay. That is really the only legislation in place here in Camden that you could say is historic preservation. And that is a fairly recent addition, and it was the product of many conversations about trying to write the historic preservation ordinance in full. But the demolition delay was kind of a compromise or baby step towards hopefully eventually creating a full historic preservation ordinance. So there's often a misunderstanding that if something is on the historic register, that it is protected federally or by the state. It is not. It can be demolished. That protection only comes at the local level through a historic preservation ordinance. And we've seen lots of homes demoed over the years here in Camden. And we have an application even this Monday on a home that is set for demolition that the Historic Resources Committee will be reviewing. We can do nothing other than say, let's delay that demolition for 120 days. That's all we can do. So we are largely an advisory group, If the committee were to transform to a commission, which is one of the things a preservation ordinance does, then we have some enforcement powers to enforce the ordinance. But right now we're just an advisory body. Just a little background about what's going on here in Maine and in Camden, that Maine is the fastest growing state in New England. It has had a 50% population increase just in the year 23, which is more than the decade from 2010 to 2019. So we've got an explosion of influx people, both within the United States and internationally. And a lot of that demographic are younger people and affluent people. So the demographics of towns throughout Maine are changing, especially in towns like Camden, mid-coast towns, where a lot of the properties are second homes. So these are all homes that are ripe for renovation and potential demolition. So that's why we've seen some kind of acceleration in demolition and renovation. That's kind of a greater context. Right now, the estimate is that 21% of the properties in Maine are second homes, which is an incredibly high percentage. Okay, so what is the history of preservation here in Camden? Well, preservation in the United States is a long story and a long history. Back in like 1850 was one of the beginning conversations about antiquity and history in the United States as Mount Vernon began to decay. So there was discussions about what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to preserve American history at the national level? And that started to trickle down to the state levels, such that in 1966, there was finally the first National Historic Preservation Act. And shortly thereafter, in 1969, down in Rockland, there was a big brouhaha about the post office there that was demolished. And that led to further discussions about how we're going to protect old buildings in the mid-coast. And you can see some of the benchmarks and milestones over the years here in Camden. It should be noted that some of the biggest successes in terms of preservation were done by citizen campaigns. So in 81, citizens protected the harbor. They shortly thereafter protected the Opera House, then the post office. Citizen initiative has a huge impact and a long history of trying to preserve old buildings and landmarks. In 1992, as I said before, we were formed, our committee. And from 2009 to 2016 in particular, there were robust efforts to write a historic preservation ordinance and bring it to the town. In 2011, there was a fully drafted historic preservation ordinance, largely through the efforts of Chris Glass, that never actually made it to the voters. And so this has been an ongoing conversation. I joined the HRC about 2.5 years ago, and even then it was the preeminent thing that we discussed and wanted to work on. So there has been years of research while I've been on the committee and dating far back. I guess I'd really like to acknowledge the Glass family, Rosalie and Chris, and also the Scaling family, Pat and Michael. They have done tremendous work on historic preservation within town, and it's often thankless work. And so this is some context. Bringing it up to current, last year on the November warrant, there was a vote to authorize our committee to move forward with the drafting of a historic preservation ordinance. And as you can see, it was passed overwhelmingly yes, basically 2,800 to 600. It was a big endorsement for us to move forward. And then anecdotally, we hosted a historic walk last year, and I put the brochure out there for the Chestnut Historic District walk. It's on the back table. So we developed that map, which is of all the historic homes, or most of them, in the Chestnut Historic District, and a guided walk. And we hosted, I think it was 3 different walks through the district. And there was just tremendous excitement and support of that experience, and people along the way, and people who took the walk, and people who have touched it in one way or another, all were really supportive. And it kind of emphasized just the tremendous history we have in town and the story of all these different homes. So that's one of the major efforts, is to protect those stories. Okay. So here's just some of the homes that we have lost. These are all homes that were in the historic district, but there have been other homes lost or renovated. But these are some of the noteworthy losses, and that list is just going to increase, keep getting longer. So I know that each time one of these houses disappears, there's a large constituency in the town that are really saddened, disappointed, and affected by it. So it's our hope to kind of mitigate this. Okay. So what are some of the benefits to having an HBO in Camden? One, obviously, we've talked about saving historic properties from demolition. That is first and foremost why we are pursuing this. But it also provides guidance and on restoration and renovation for those property owners. It provides some clarity about what it means to live in a historic district and clarity about kind of what community values are and what we all take pride in. And it's a way for us to preserve a super unique history that attracts visitors to this town and makes it a great place to live. We continue to attract families and new businesses, and largely that's because of our character. And HBO tends to strengthen the tourist economy of the towns that have them. It stabilizes property values, and it has been shown to have greater appreciation in properties that are within historic districts as measured against homes that are not in those historic districts. It also gives access to grants and bonds and tax initiatives. There's a lot of different things that are tied to historic preservation, and notably today, I think earlier today, what was it called? The Historic Preservation Fund it had been frozen and it was just released today. So that was a big success. And again, that was largely citizens saying you need to unfreeze these funds, and the government responded. So that was a big win for historic preservation. And last year in November, there were two pretty big initiatives to fund historic preservation here in the state. So it's very topical and widely supported. So drilling down a little bit, preservation creates community. I really like this bottom quote. This was written by Lyndon Johnson's speechwriter. We do not use bombs to destroy irreplaceable structures related to the story of American civilization. We use the corrosion of neglect or the thrust of bulldozers. Connections between successive generations of Americans are broken by demolition. I really like that quote. And I think that's at the root of what we're trying to kind of push back against here. Over and over again, it's shown that people have deep attachment to old places, to buildings, to continuity, to identity, and shared memories. And I like the concept that preserving tangible things, tangible buildings and structures, help us understand and remember the intangible things about a community or a town or living together. All right, so preservation and tourism. The Maine Office of Tourism, in their destination management plan, which they present annually to the governor for their approval, has continued to focus more and more on heritage travel and cultural travel. So that's an emphasis of the Office of Tourism. And that's because heritage visitors spend more per day, they stay longer, and they visit more places than general tourists. And I think that top statistic is pretty interesting, that in 2023, tourists contributed $16 billion to Maine's economy, lowering taxes for every Maine household by $2,400. And the State Office of Tourism reports that tourism supports nearly 107,000 jobs in Maine, roughly 16% of employment in the state. And obviously, Camden is a town that thrives and depends on tourism. Okay, so preservation and the economy. So I've stated that how historic landmarks and historic preservation increase tourism, which bolsters the local economy, but also increases job creation and general revenue. And it adds appreciation to property values and allows access to certain grants and tax initiatives. So if you have a historic preservation ordinance in your town, there's kind of a higher level you can strive for. And that's called being a certified local government. So that's a state program where once you have a drafted historic preservation ordinance, if it meets certain criteria, you can apply to the state historic commissioner to then be authorized or certified as a certified local government. That gives you access to certain tax initiatives and certain grants. There is some debate about the worthwhileness of being a CLG because sometimes the maintenance and the reporting of it, or the cost to be compliant and the amount that you get from the grant, that this is something that's debated, but it's something that kind of to perhaps strive for, because we do have some projects here in town that might really directly benefit from CLG status. And it's kind of a clear set of criteria. The Curtis Island Light is in search of funding and grant money that would be greatly assisted by CLG status, as would potentially the Yacht Club as they look to climate resiliency. And who knows what's going to happen with the dam. But there are things around town that I think would be benefit from CLG status. So as it sits now, it's something that we would like to strive for in the drafting of our historic preservation ordinance, but it's something that's not mandatory. It could be dialed back if we decide that's just not a good fit for the town of Camden. Okay. All right, I'm going to introduce Chris Fassel. He's going to talk a little bit about preservation and architecture as an architect.
Can I just talk from here?
You can talk from there, as long as you're on mic.
Well, it says old buildings are fun and inspirational to architect, and they are. And I've been at it for a long time.
Closer to your mouth.
Mike, closer to your mouth.
Oh, hello.
Better, much better.
I've been involved with it my life. I grew up in what's now a landmark community in Ohio, and have always lived in an old existing building. And I've also practiced architecture here for 50 years. And I've done, most of my work has been on existing buildings, some of them historic and some of them not, many of them not. And I've dealt with a few codes over the years and all that. And the preservation work is just so much more fun because you're dealing with the unexpected, and it's really when you, for me, preservation is the study of the technology of building and how that leads to styles, et cetera, et cetera. And what the ordinance does is give you, what the HPO will give you is some direction in what you can and should not do, or you may and should not do. And I didn't pay much attention to that. Here's a quote from, with guidelines for preserving, rehabilitating, restoring, and reconstructing historic buildings, radically changing, damaging, or destroying elements which are important in defining the overall historic character of the building, so that as a result, the character is diminished. And in an architecture project, the first part of the project is the programming. And the programming is for a historic project is determining those elements that are historic and worthy of protecting. The projects need not to be encumbered by the commission's review. That's important. We're not in here to make anybody do anything. We're here is to protect the building and the history of our community.
Great.
I
Just
guess that's it.
and another kind of anecdotal, I called about a dozen of the different commissioners around the state and just had casual phone interviews, just kind of wanting to learn about how did their commission work with their town and their property owners and what that process was like and kind of best practices, what did work, what didn't work. And across the board, they each had different takes, but one thing that was consistently said is that it was working for their community and that there was a high level of cooperation between the commission and property owners, that the cases of denying an application were very infrequent and rare, and that more often than not, they were either approved or approved with conditions, but it was always a dialogue, that the commission is not there to be a police body, but rather to work with property owners just to maintain the character of a town. So, and that is certainly the spirit with which we've been approaching the ordinance. Okay, Danny Solomon is going to talk to us a little bit about deconstruction.
So I've been doing work in this field for a bit before moving to Maine. I've been here for about 4 years. This is sort of a growing movement throughout the country, that in the unfortunate circumstance when a building is at the end of its life cycle, if it can't be preserved, demolition is not the only option. Deconstruction, just a sort of broad definition, is the careful dismantling of a building to maximize the recovery of materials for reuse. And so one example of a project that I just executed was taking down, unfortunately, a home that was part of our historic district on Chestnut Street. Some of you maybe witnessed that. A house from 1800. And here are some images of that process. So, again, the goal here is not to deconstruct homes willy-nilly. It's only if it must be taken down, rather than have all those materials end up in the landfill, salvaging as much as possible. And usually deconstruction projects can salvage upwards of like 80% of the material, excluding the foundation. So it's a really significant savings. But beyond just, the environmental reasons, there's also really good economic reasons for it. It's job creation. And I have been employing young people in our area to work with me. I actually used to run a program called the Hatchery at the high school, where we committed also to doing reuse work and pulling materials from waste streams rather than buying things new. So a lot of the students who worked with me are now employees for a company that I started called Second Story Builders. So we're, also doing workforce development. As we all know, we need more people in the trades here. So deconstruction also offers a really great opportunity for a pipeline to the trades. By taking old buildings apart, you learn how they were put up. And it gives all these young people a deep appreciation for the history that's being lost. We found incredible artifacts, both in this house and another house that we took down a year before when I was still working at the high school. This was from 1890. We found medium format film in the wall of like images from the Korean War and all these things. So anyway, there's a lot of benefits to this. And again, I just want to stress that, this is something that I think is really important, but it is not the goal to deconstruct historic homes. It is just the better alternative to demolition.
Yeah, so deconstruction really kind of dovetails with the efforts of historic preservation, and in such that it really continues the story of a place even after the place is gone. One of the things that's really cool about Danny's work is that he does capture the story of the materials that he takes and passes that story on to the new place that is built even across the street. Do you want to just talk about that just real quick? Or
Yeah, so one of the projects that we've done, and maybe some of you have seen this, is the Villager Cafe renovation. All of the materials, or most of the materials that are in the cafe that we used were from this house from 1890 that we took down about a year and a half ago. Yeah, so if you end up going there, you can take a closer look. The wainscoting is all old lath that was cleaned up from the house. Lath is a pretty common material that you'll find in older homes. So finding interesting ways to reuse that. The bar and register and coffee station tops were all part of the sheathing material that came from that house, beautiful old growth lumber. And then all of the tabletops were made with rafters and studs and things like this cleaned up. So that's just one example of ways you can kind of take the materials and make them beautiful and part of our community again.
It's definitely a burgeoning industry, and that Danny has been working with one of the leaders in the field, the woman who wrote the first deconstruction policy for the town of Portland, or is it Seattle?
Yeah, so Portland, Oregon actually passed the first ordinance of its kind in the country that mandates deconstruction for certain buildings. And it's been really successful, and so successful that it actually was amended to expand the scope of the mandate in 2020. And so this individual has been part of my network, and she's also helped a lot of other cities start to establish similar legislation. So it really is a growing movement, and I think it's the way we should be moving.
Great, thank you. So in the state of Maine, we already have 20 towns who have an HPO in place. Camden really is kind of behind the curve on that. We are a town that perfectly fits the profile of a town that should have historic preservation ordinance. We have so many historic properties here in town. We're a frequently visited town. Our character is such that people recognize those features in our town and come to see them. And the effort to have one has been ongoing for 2 decades. So I think it's about time for Camden to step forward and have a historic preservation ordinance. Of those towns, 12 are certified local governments. They have been certified. Those closest in size to Camden, or like Castine, Gardner, and York, have all benefited from grants through the CLG program. As I said, the CLG program has its pros and cons, but that's something for us to kind of discuss as we develop further. But the HPOs have definitely driven economic development. And I really like this quote. This is from a conversation with the commissioner in York. He said, "An HPO maintains value in historic districts. The character can't be separated from history. That visitors and residents look for that character. Some towns try to recapture history, but we didn't want to wait until a beloved building was gone." So I really think that proactive approach is important, not to keep lamenting things after the fact, but to value them while they still exist. Okay. So what is in an HPO? In the handouts over there, you can drill down to all the specifics, but just at a very top level, these are the primary components. It begins with a statement of purpose and definition. So you set out the objectives. What are we trying to accomplish with our historic preservation? What are we trying to do? Then a definition of all the terms therein. Then the establishment of a historic preservation commission. In our case, we already have our historic resources committee, so it would just be changing that committee to a commission, and definitions around who serves on that commission, the terms of their service, and what have you. I can tell you that it's our opinion and effort to continue recruiting the most qualified people to be on that commission. Currently, we have an architect, an expert in deconstruction, a scholar. We have a diverse group on the committee that are unified in their willingness to volunteer tons of hours and to be knowledgeable in this area, and to have passion for historic preservation, which I think is the main criteria for serving on this committee. But we realize that it will always be beneficial to bring in people with more specific expertise. Although I will caveat that by saying that we're hoping that the preservation ordinance is simple enough that a lay person, both a property owner and a person on the commission, would have an easy understanding of this. We're trying to avoid highly technical document. We want it to be a real workable, easy document. Then the next thing in the HPO is a criteria for historic designation. So what are we saying is historic? In the case of Camden, that would be listing our historic resources and creating a pathway for if a homeowner wanted to subscribe to the ordinance himself. No property can be included as a designated property unless the property owner submits it and wants to go through that process themselves. In the case of a historic district or landmark, it's no different than having to apply to the National Register. There's a long process that then eventually comes to the town for ratification and vote. So there is no concern that once you have a commission, the commission just goes around saying things are historic. That's not how it works. It effectively works the same way it works now. And we'll get to what the list of existing historic resources are. The next thing is there's a review process. So the applicant creates their application for historic preservation. If they're going to modify their home, it's brought to the commission. The commission then certifies and approves that renovation. And then it goes through the regular steps of any project here in town with the planning board or with the planning department. So this is just, it would just be a first layer review just for historicity. Then there would be an enforcement mechanism. So a historic preservation ordinance without any teeth or any ability to enforce itself is meaningless. So there would be some enforcement mechanism. And then there's always an appeal process. So if a property owner feels that their review was unfair or unfounded, or there's always a way to appeal that judgment. So those are the main components of a historic preservation ordinance. What's not there is the disposition of the committee or commission that is creating the ordinance itself. And our disposition is, again, to try and keep something that's very easy, workable, flexible, and collaborative with the public. So this isn't about imposing things on the public. This is about protecting the community. Okay, so what will be some of the specific features of an HPO here in Camden? Well, I won't drill down too much because that's something for the public to help us formulate, but it would convert the HRC, our committee, to a commission. It would apply to the designated historic district sites and landmarks that were in the article approved in November by voters, and then those specified in the ordinance itself. So in the warrant or article in November, we had a list, and I'm going to show you that next, of specifically historic designated properties. The only addition to that list would be the Conway House, which is the home to the Camden Rockport Historical Society. So that would be the only addition to the November warrant. So basically, HPO would regulate demolition and standards as set forth by the Secretary of the Interior. And I have a copy of 36 CFR 68 back there. But the HPO is going to steer away from regulating details like exterior paint. We don't want in any way for our town to be like an HOA. That's not the intent here. So we're trying to maintain character rather than regulate details. So here is the historic overlay map. We have a copy back there and printouts here, but this is our existing historic overlay map, and it comprises the 3 historic districts: the High Street Historic District, the Great Fire Historic District, the Chestnut Street Historic District, the Curtis Island Light, Camden Opera House, the Yacht Club, the Village Green, the Public Library and Amphitheater, Post Office, and the Conway House. So these would be the historic resources listed in the ordinance itself. And that's where the ordinance would apply to those specific things. As terms of process and timeline, we've just, as I've told you, this has been in the works for years and years. The 2017 comprehensive plan required or requested that the Historic Resources Committee move forward with drafting historic preservation ordinance. The next comprehensive plan is due in 27. So we're hoping to get just under that deadline and actually get historic preservation ordinance completed as requested by the comprehensive plan, which was approved by voters. So we want to engage with the public as we are now, continue to engage with the public, take your feedback and incorporate it into a first draft of the HBO, and also rely on best practices from other towns. Then it would go through review and revision with zoning amendments, with the planning board, planning department, town officials, and the Maine Historic Preservation Commission. Then it would come back to the select board for review and public hearings, and then eventually a public vote, which we are thinking realistically will be June 26th. We had wanted to do November of this year, but we just think there's too much ahead of us still. So it's probably going to be June 26th. And people are kind of burned out with big political issues in town. So I think it'd be good to kind of maybe take a little breath. So in conclusion, first of all, thank you for your attention. Appreciate it. And the objectives of an HBO have been endorsed by Camden voters and the Historic Resources Committee. Historic preservation is a vital conversation with our past about our future. And once a historic building is gone, it's gone forever. We invite you all to stay involved. The Historic Resources Committee meets every second Monday at 4 o'clock right here. It's always public, and it's also always live streamed and then recorded on YouTube. Please come and share your thoughts. This is what we're going to be talking about. So if you have strong opinions, let us know them and come. Please subscribe to our Facebook and Instagram page. And then that email address is a way for you to correspond with us and tell us your thoughts, give us your feedback. If you can't fill out the questionnaire now, you could fill it out and send it to us. And also it's going to be one way in which we start to form a mailing list so we can maybe send polling questions. But that's it for our presentation. And now I'd like to open up to Q&A. And I'm going to sit down if you don't mind. So do people have questions? Thank you very much. Yes.
I have a question about building use. Like, how do HPOs work? Like, with a building's use of function? So let's say a house is purchased and then maybe later renovated into apartments or Airbnbs. Like, historically, how does that work with other communities? Do you have any information?
That's more of a zoning question.
That is.
Yeah.
That the use is determined by the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
It's already in place. I think your preservation type of things are more aesthetic.
Aesthetics.
And yes, if you want to do adaptive reuse, that's a popular thing that goes on with historic buildings. You change the use into something new, but you still maintain the integrity,
Yes.
aesthetics.
Shanley, do you want to identify yourself just
I'm
for?
just a town planner for Camden, so I've been around 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what the historic preservation ordinance largely concerns itself with is the aesthetics of the exterior as it presents itself publicly. So it's not about interior issues. Yes.
We live at 42 Main,
Uh-huh.
and we're probably one of the oldest houses in town,
Yeah.
1795.
Yeah.
Our concern is more addressing the coordination and cooperation with property owners on maintenance issues and reconstruction issues, and how this commission would relate to that. When you put up the goals and objectives, of the HPO, it didn't include relationship with property owners. It didn't. I sort of feel like we're the result and we're the financial bearers of the decisions that potentially could come through this organization, and that is a huge concern. For example, if we have dental molding that's made of mahogany, do I need to replace that with dental molding made of mahogany, or can I use AZAC? We have windows that need to be replaced. Can we use more modern technology windows, or do we need to refurb our old traditional double hungs that leak and whatever. Are heat pumps or other energy efficiency devices going to be excluded because it may interfere with the historical presence of the town? The two, the CRFs that you handed out, when you read the fine print, they talk about incentives to the communities. But where is the incentive to the homeowner that may bear the price and cost of various required, potentially required revisions and updates? I would say, as you develop an ordinance, I think the property owners and the people that are going to be writing the checks need to be a close and shared development of that ordinance, so that we are not the pawns of the process, but actually part of the players of the process.
Sure. Well, first of all, great questions, and those concerns are absolutely first and foremost in our minds. And we thought,
but they weren't on your objectives.
oh no, they are. They're baked in. But Jennifer, why don't you? Oh, let me address
What are
that.
their goals? They weren't included.
To have a conversation with homeowners and property owners.
Make property owners part of the solution.
Well, that's why you're here first and
Yeah,
foremost. But absolutely. But Jennifer wanted to.
I'm going to take that one only because I live in a historic district too. And in the past 3 years, I have replaced my roof. I have replaced 21 windows. I have replaced my wood deck, front porch with AZAC, and I have installed heat pumps. So everything that you have said is in my mind.
But there's no ordinance.
But there's no ordinance.
Right, there's no ordinance, but I'm telling you, they're in my mind. So I'm going to be involved in writing it. And so that's, trust me, if there's one value I bring, I'm not an architect or an engineer, but I bring that sympathy. And it's a valid concern, because a lot of things that you do from a historic perspective to maintain integrity can rapidly get irresponsibly expensive, right? And so there needs to be a real balance that's considered between maintaining the aesthetic, but also understanding what can be reasonably expected. And I want that to be embedded, because it hits my pocketbook too.
Well, and the other thing too is, if we were ever to sell our house, someone potentially buying the house would go, oh, there are all these ordinances, and
Right.
I'm not sure I want.
Right, and I
to be
think
subject to those
Chris said that
laws.
very clearly, when we don't want to be an HOA, right? We don't want to make it be onerous. The whole intent of the HPO is to make it more attractive to live in a historic neighborhood, not to make it unattractive. So yes, I totally understand this.
I'd love to address some of the things you said too, because you said a lot, and they're all great points. I would hope that every single one of those concerns would be answered and meet your approval when the final ordinance is drafted. Everyone's not going to agree on every point, but town by town, you kind of listed the main things that become contentious when drafting these. People want to know about paint color, people want to know about windows, people want to know about materials, and people want to know about solar panels. Those are the 4 things that tend to come up over and over again. So those are things that we would decide publicly as to what our priorities are as a town, and to what level of compliance do we want to have on those things. We're leaning towards very lenient towards if the material you're using represents the aesthetic, that's fine. We want to be very forward thinking in terms of meeting the needs of the environment, climate change, modern usage. We're not trying to be retrograde in terms of making everybody live as though they're in the 1800s, but we do want to maintain a certain aesthetic for the town, which attracts people and maintains your property value. But I think one of the main things is, if you can kind of, I don't mean to be cheeky, but rather than think about this as being something that's done to you, think about it something that is being given to the entire town to protect everybody. So it's everybody's joining in a community effort to have kind of a cohesive presence, a cohesive set of values, and it does benefit everybody, even financially. So yes, while you're going to have
At
what's
our expense.
not necessarily at your expense, if you're having to,
We're writing the checks.
no, but if you're replacing a window, you're replacing a window whether there's an ordinance or not.
No, correct.
Right.
Depending on the criteria
Right.
for like kind, as the
Right.
Secretary of State has
Right.
defined. If like kind is the requirement, then it could be a financial burden.
It could be, yes. And we will work hard to make sure that property owners throughout the historic districts are on board with this. That's our goal.
You have a question up
Yeah.
here.
Oh, Stephanie.
Yes, hi, I have a more generic question. So I do not live in a historic district, but I have historic landmark status for a 1798 house. So would my house be protected, which I hope it would, even though it's outside of that list you showed of historic districts?
It would not be protected if the ordinance were written as we think it will be written and approved. But there would be a pathway for you as an individual property owner to say, I would like my home to be locally historically designated so that you are participating in the ordinance too. It's a property owner has to opt into the ordinance unless you've already gone through the process of being identified as a historic district and listed within the ordinance itself.
Okay,
no-
so my house has already been designated with a plaque of a historic house.
Mhm.
Is it separate that you need to be designated as an historic district? Because my house was part of a farm, 300 acres that went all the way across the Gunnacook River. So
You-
I'm not understanding how I can be sure my house is protected.
So once there is an ordinance in place, you would apply to the commission to have your property locally historically designated, and then it would be brought through the commission to the town for the town to approve the addition of your property to the ordinance.
Okay, even
That
though
makes
it
sense.
already has gotten the status from the town.
Yes, the ordinance itself only applies to the things it names within itself.
All right,
So
Thank you.
it's not a willy-nilly, everybody is has a plaque or is on the National Register, is automatically part of the ordinance. The ordinance defines its own terms. But
All right,
if you
thank
really,
you.
I would love to add your home if you wanted to.
Yeah, no, it's one of the very early properties, like way early before some of the in-town properties. So I wrote down your email and I'll be in touch.
Great, thank you. I mean, one of the initial questions is why not make this town-wide? And I think the answer to that is obvious. There would just be so much contention about, is my home historic, is it not? Most of the homes in Camden have not gone through any historic designation process. So the existing historic resources make sense to be identified in the ordinance. Other questions? Yes.
Another resident of the historic district, I'm also on Main Street.
Yeah.
Houses up in these folks here. Just one thing, the Chestnut Street walk is awesome. I did that when it was first offered, and it's great. One thing though about Chestnut Street, and if you walk from town all the way down to the cemetery, it's one of my favorite walks. Also, if you walk up from my house at the corner of Central and Main up to Whitehall Inn, and you see a lot of old houses that people have spent a lot of money on. I mean, they bought the houses in general, and those houses are still there because people are buying those houses because they do enjoy the historic character. I mean, I've done a ton of work to my house, 50 Main Street. I guess, let me just throw this out. I mean, given that those houses have been so well maintained, I mean, and then I see this ordinance, one of the suggested provisions is that one of the penalties is incarceration. Hopefully we're not.
That's not in our ordinance.
That's good. But I would just like to throw out, I mean, whether a ordinance that puts power in this commission to enforce requirements that it comes up with is necessary versus a body that is created and which promulgates the standards for the town. Here's what we'd really like to see, and here's why. I mean, I saw your list of, places that have been lost. The only one I recognized was 9 High Street, and I thought that was still there. I mean, maybe I missed something. But none of the big houses on Chestnut Street have been lost. None of the big houses on High Street have been lost. And a lot of them have been very substantially renovated.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
so I just like to throw out, whether we're beyond the point of considering whether an ordinance that has a compulsory component that's going to raise the issues about who pays, for example,
Mhm.
role, where we'll take them. Is that really necessary?
Well, I think obviously the residents of Camden have been tremendous custodians of Camden. Camden is a wonderful town and has been for a very long time because the people who live here care about it and are already aware of historic preservation and, as you say, taking care of their homes. But we do have a changing demographic. We do have a lot of change of property, and not everyone who comes into the area is going to have the same history or shared memory of the place. And people may come in with different priorities, and we are seeing accelerated application for demolition. So you can say nothing has been done to my house or this house or the house, but there are other houses that are gone. And when the bulldozer's next to you, or when it happens to a house that you care about, then you'll maybe say, well, it is good that we have an ordinance that can prevent that kind of demolition. I don't think that the components of this ordinance are going to be onerous to current property owners, and the main thrust is stopping demolition.
I did like what you said about, you've done a lot of this stuff. But one thing that concerned me about your description of the ordinance is that it would try to be simple.
Mhm.
I mean, simple generally is general. And if you have something that's simple and general, then that may have a tendency to put a lot of discretion in the commission who is then enforcing this.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I might be more inclined to have something that's be more comfortable with something that's specific than something that's general. I mean, you're here today. Whoever replaces you may not have the same sensibility of having been there. Also, keep coming back to demolition.
Mhm.
May be useful. I mean, is it possible to have an ordinance that is very strict with respect to demolition, but not really with respect to anything else? I mean, at least initially. I mean, given the experience of the town, I mean, I walk up Chestnut Street, and I don't know what the address is, but there's one of those colonials with 5 windows across the top, 4 of them. It's been completely. They might have deconstructed it, but they did. They redid the whole thing.
Hard to hear you. Would you mind speaking up a little?
You could do a microphone. Yeah. Thank you. But yeah, I forgot what I was saying. But I mean, there are places. Yeah, there are places. Yeah, there are places that could have been demolished, but they weren't. I mean, let me ask a question. People have done a lot of work to the houses on Chestnut Street and on High Street. If you guys walk around, is there anything that you guys would have said, no, you guys can't do that? I mean, putting in a pool, putting in a fence. I mean, what have you seen that if you had the power to say, no, we need to preserve the historic character, whatever, you would have said, no, we really have some concerns about that. Anything you can point to? Just curious, something to think about, maybe.
Well, just to your one point about simple. So the town of Castine's preservation ordinance, which I think I left a copy of that as well, but at least I have reference to it. That is 20 pages long. And that's considered a simple historic preservation. The town of Hampton's is 12 pages long. So when I say simple, we're still talking about a document that tries to cover every case, but it also makes reference to federal and state guidelines. So simple doesn't mean a half page, everything left to the discretion of the commission and we can do whatever we want. That's not where this is going. And I invite you to be part of the process. Like, your concerns are completely valid. And if you participate in the drafting of this, then hopefully we address the things that are concerning you. Yeah.
Just a quick reinforcement, you've heard it before, but a relation in Portland wanted to replace the windows. It ended up costing him a lot more. And he couldn't get the windows he wanted because he had to conform to the historic. So you're aware of it. And I would, maybe a strategy is, I heard you talk a lot to the commissions. Maybe we need to find a way to talk to the homeowners who are living under those commissions and what their experiences are, which might be through, in other towns, to get some guidance like, yeah, this worked, this didn't work. I really like this, I didn't like that. Because those are the recipients who are trying to work under it. And then, and I don't understand this because it's the first time I'm hearing about it, but the qualification, this has to do with money. You were talking about the potential financial benefits by the town qualifying to be a
CLG.
CLG.
Mhm.
Couldn't that be something that could defray or be available to the homeowners who are trying to live in the district for grants, or I don't know? You said it made the town eligible for things like Curtis Island, like doing the lighthouse, but any large historic
There's a
building could potentially qualify.
there's a pool of money. There's a pool of money that is earmarked and kept separate specifically only for those towns that are CLG qualified. So there's a pool of grant money available to towns that have been certified as a CLG. So it prioritizes
For what?
for historic preservation, renovation.
For whom? Could it be
Oh.
people who live in the historic district, or is it only the town?
I think for property owners themselves, it's usually tax initiatives. These are more for large projects like a restoration of,
Like Curtis.
exactly.
But thinking creatively, couldn't there be something that a homeowner could apply for to say, I'm gonna put in $50,000 of windows, here's $10,000 to help you conform to the.
I don't have an answer to that question, and that maybe perhaps,
Tax incentive.
Are the
Yeah.
state,
Property taxes.
right, are state historic tax credits available to individuals?
Can I speak to
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
We have 3 historic districts in the town. 2 of them are mixed commercial and residential, mostly residential. And most of you are here because you have houses that qualify for being in the district. The other district is the fire district, and that has no residential units in it. It's all of downtown that was burned up in the fire. And it's really interesting to go look at some of the old photographs of what was left of the district when it burned in the 1890s. But the tax credits are only relevant to to commercial projects. And the lighthouse would not qualify. There has been money set aside in the state for municipal or nonprofit building owners that are not commercial, not residential. And those monies were made to make those lot churches and things like that. I did a lot of that. So there's the CLG and all that makes those tax credits available or qualify.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say, my wife and I recently purchased 12 High Street, which is a historic home in the district on the National Register, built in 1838. And it's one of the only homes left in that area that still has vinyl siding and aluminum trim covering up all of the original historic details, and honestly looks terrible. And we've done a lot to stabilize it, to make it safe for the tenants who live there. But my understanding of the way that the ordinances are currently written, we could tear that building down and replace it with something really ugly. And so we're excited about this process and being a part of it.
Tearing it down and making it ugly?
No. No, but I think it's an example of the potential that there is for those things to happen and how important it is for committees, commissions like this to be in place to, honor these historic buildings.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But we're excited about this.
Well, thank you.
for the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
And also, I just wanted to say that being on the historic, when we found out that the property was on it, we were excited about it. Like, it was something that was a selling point for us, and we immediately went to the library and started, totally dorking out on what was going on in the house and how it was built and why it was used and what that weird part on the side of it is. And so we got really excited about it. So I just want to say, as a property owner, there is the other side that, maybe we're into it generally, but we're excited about maintaining that house and bringing it back to how it, should look one day. And I think other young people are, share that vision for Camden and want to protect Camden. I think there's a lot of energy around that right now. So thank you.
Great. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
You gave a timeline of how long you've been kind of working, or Camden has been working on various aspects of this. What have been the problems in instituting this kind of ordinance? Have you continually tried to do so and run into barriers that could not be overcome?
Well, since I wasn't a member of the committee for all those years, I can only go by what has been told to me. Ken might be a valuable resource here, but my understanding is that the ordinance moved the furthest forward in 2011. And in fact, I have a copy of what was drafted then. My understanding is that there was pushback from the business community at that time, but I don't think that really makes sense now. There's a lot of reasons why I would think the business community actually would be in support of it now, but that we'll see. But I think the overall climate has changed dramatically in terms of the value of historic preservation. So I think we're in a different place than we were in the past, and maybe it was just too new of a concept or didn't quite fit. Maybe, Ken, do you have any comment on that, or do you have any perspective on?
I don't remember specifically whether the pushback or whether reluctance came from, except that there was general sense.
A lot of not in my backyard.
Yes.
Or
Or
you're not going to tell me what I can do with my
Diversity
property.
restricted. They wanted the freedom to do what they wanted with their property. It's that notion, that fundamental right to do what you want to with your property.
You may have a founding member of the Historic Resources Committee, you're sitting right next to me, but we were members of the Historic Resources Committee at that time.
Oh, great.
11 through 15. I was on for 6 years. Barbara was on for her entire life practically.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't know that.
But yeah, there was a lot of what Chris said. It's not in my backyard kind of thing. I think the not mindset has evolved, as these folks have said. And I get it from a couple of different directions, since I'm a local contractor, and I have to often bridge that gap between what's code, what's not code. How do we bring things up to code? How do we make it more energy efficient to comply with UVEC, or to at least come close to that? And money is always the top of the obstacle list to overcome. What I've been finding a lot of is as the interest in the homes evolved, as you folks articulated, people call me and say, I've got a railing, for example, and this happened to me just last week, and sent me some pictures, and of course the balusters are 3 feet apart. Perfect. I got a toddler. Code. Gonna go right through that. Right? So how do we fix it? But how do we make it look right? So, we're talking about now actually lifting the rail off, getting the balusters, replicating them, or if we can fit them in between. We're working on ways to do that, because these folks have initiated that interest. And I find it great that people are doing that. I find a lot of that.
And it's fun.
What's that?
And it's fun.
Yeah, it is.
It's fun to architect.
I might have to call you.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's an evolution, and back in 11, 12, 13, almost everybody what you said.
yeah.
Were-
Well, thank
Mark,
you.
were you around for the 1917 or 2017?
I was in the Army.
Who wrote that? Do
What?
you remember who actually wrote the proposed ordinance?
The first draft of that?
It's-
I wasn't, I don't remember. Was somebody on the committee maybe at that time? I don't recall.
I don't think Chris
I
Glass
think it was
did,
Pat
but he had
Scaling.
much to do with it.
Pat
Was
Scaling
he-
might have had some input. Pat Scaling might have had some input.
That's
Pat
good.
Scaling.
Oh, yes, yes. Well,
I
yes.
think she was spearheading a lot of that, didn't she?
Not, are we talking about
He wasn't
2011 or
around-
which year?
Around at that time.
She came in later, 15, 16, something like
Yeah.
that. I thought.
Yeah.
um,
She was certainly working on drafting when I joined, and it's been an ongoing process, so.
There's a really an interesting article I came across back then, and I brought it to the committee. It was written by the former director of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, Richard Moe.
Mhm.
And the article was, I think, called "Building Upon What Is Built." And of all the great points he made in the article, it's a short article. He did a calculation of the BTUs it takes to actually demolish a home and take it away versus restoring a worthwhile building.
Yeah.
And it beat it hands down, less energy, less waste to actually rehabilitate a place in terms of the actual practicability of it. I'm not talking about cost. now.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Danny has an interesting information, like that's right in line with what, you know, the sustainability of deconstruction here. Yeah.
I'd like to point out, the MET was scheduled for demolition, and what a service it provides for the school system and our community and all that. And it costs a lot of money, but it saved a lot of carbon.
I'll just make a point. I think it's kind of already been made, but any article you read about historic preservation and drafting historic preservation ordinance and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's always a discussion around the balance between property owner rights and the common good of a community. And that's going to be the ongoing conversation that we have, and that we have to figure out where we land. That's just part of this. Yeah.
Okay. Some of you know me. I'm John Schultz, and we have an architecture firm, Schultz and Barclay. Meg Barclay's my partner. She'll come to your next session. She couldn't be here tonight. We're also the architects working on 9 High Street. And the clients really wanted to save that building. I can tell you that it has been a labor of love. I'm not going to divulge what the project is going to cost, but it is huge, absolutely huge. We've been working on it for 3 years. We'll be on it another year. We've redesigned the carriage house, same footprint, keeping it in character to fit the needs of the place. And we also, our firm did the Camden Library Edition. We also did the Belfast Library Edition. We also did Beech Nut Stone Cottage up there, working with Earl Shuttleworth back when. And I think that a lot of what you've said about what you want to do, and particularly your comments and your comments and your comments, I think makes a lot of sense. I think that to this gentleman's point, however, you have to keep, you definitely need to somehow codify to make people feel comfortable. They can use new materials, new mechanical systems. I'm on a learning curve all the time with this new stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, whether it be heat pumps, whether it be new electrical systems, site lighting, you name it. There's a lot of things. And you'll see that when High Street is finished. has a huge hardscape project out there in the lawn side of it going in. So I think that, and we are staying true, for example, in High Street, we are staying true to the molding profiles and so on. We're updating them a bit. We actually have our contractor cutting knives to match the trim.
Wow.
So that we can successfully do that. We've had to replace a lot of rot, and the building was actually, unfortunately, almost falling down, if you can believe it. I'm amazed that it even operated as an inn. So, but I think that when you put together this commission, I think look for people. I mean, as someone said, the members on this group here, you might have 3 excellent members right now, 4 including you, but that could change. And so I think you have to be careful what the criteria are going to be for those members. We also, a little off topic, but we live 6 months of the year in Winter Park, Florida. We've made presentations before their historic commission. Their commission is made up of 2 architects, an engineer, expert in historic preservation, a historian, architectural historian, and also a contractor, or maybe even 2 contractors that do restoration work. And they're very dedicated. And I don't know how many of you know Winter Park, but Winter Park's architecture started in 1920, 20 through 24, when it was laid out by actually New Englanders in Orwin Manor. And there are a lot of, and then it took a big leap forward to the 1950s. So there are a lot of international style design homes there. So I think the opportunity for future design here, not by tearing down buildings, but if they're empty lots, to make sure that there's the flexibility that you don't have commission members that are stuck on in the past on having a colonial house necessarily. There's some beautiful modern architecture that has been designed in this area that you don't see, most of it because it's not visible, but it's around, and it's really excellent architecture. So I think that, architecture design changes, things change. I mean, Frank Lloyd Wright, and then you have the international style of the 50s and 60s and so on and so forth. And our home is on the historic register in Winter Park, Florida, which is a 1924 home, 1925 home. It's a stucco Southwest design home. It's red tile roofs, and we've restored that, and it's on the register now. So it got saved. Actually, it was going to be demolished by a developer, and we came in and saved it. So just a cautionary note on that future. Keep an eye on the future,
Yeah.
as well as on the past.
I think you raised a lot of great points. I completely concur. Let me just address a couple of those things. In the language that we've already started to kind of draft and work through, we do make a nod to new materials and modern technology and modern solutions. That is something that we agree with. And if you look at Castine, which really has been kind of a role model and something that the state really steered us towards, looking at Castine's historic preservation ordinance. So we really tried to model against that. They make those same allowances for new
And
materials.
I'm familiar with that ordinance.
Yeah.
I used to live over in that part of the world.
Okay. And as far as membership, we are a little hamstrung. It's a tremendous amount of time to work on the committee and on the commission. So I don't think we can mandate the composition of the membership, but the language that we would use would recommend. So we would recommend that there be at least one member who lives in a historic district.
Excellent.
That we'd be looking for historians, we would be looking for architects, all the different positions you laid out. Those would be, of course, the first choice. The select board would have to ratify those members. So those qualifications are always the most desirable.
Right.
But we also need people that are willing to do this and passionately will show up for every meeting and be involved. And
We're a small town.
we're a
That's part
small
of the
town
problem.
and we're not paying anyone,
No.
and it's a lot of time. So that would be the goal.
Good.
I would step down if there was a far more qualified person to take my place. So there's anyway. Yes.
My questions relate to what John was saying in terms of what is historic.
Yes.
So I haven't heard anything about defining, is this a date? Is this an aesthetic? And the aesthetic can change. So the definitions might be really critical here.
Absolutely.
And the other thing, for instance, you had a list of what has been torn down.
Mhm.
And included in that list was the YMCA on Chestnut,
Mhm.
brick building,
Mhm.
which from my point of view,
You're glad it was torn down?
is no great loss. That building did not need to be preserved. In fact, the houses that went in place are lovely, and they fit in with what we see around town. So, so that definition thing. And the other part of that definition that also relates to John's comments is if something really quite new is built, but it becomes soon very valued by the community as something important in our community, how does that fit in with an historic designation? It's not historic at all, but maybe it's something that we value, and once it's there, we
Yeah.
don't want to take it away.
It's a fantastic question because, we're always talking about snapshots, right, with history. Like, should we be going back 300 years, 400 years, 5 years? Yes, that is an ongoing conversation about historic preservation. But places receive their historic designation at a certain time, place, and for certain qualifications. So that would be the definition for that place. But generally speaking, it's 75 years. Less than 75 years is not considered historic. That is something, though, that we can define again for ourselves in the ordinance. But that's kind of a typical time span. But it's more about, does this landmark or property contribute to the overall historicity of this place, this neighborhood, this community? And there is some subjectivity to that. And there is some, what are you calling history? That is a conversation. And, hopefully you've got smart people on the commission who are working with property owners and being fair-minded, and you find workable solutions case by case. So
I never would have guessed that the aesthetic that I grew up with, which was so cool and modern,
yeah.
in the early 60s, is now highly valued
Mhm.
and sells for a lot when it's sold on
Yeah.
whether it's a piece of furniture or whatever. That I never would have guessed that would be valued
Yes.
and considered historic. And then, of course, there may be things now that in the future will also be done.
Absolutely.
It sounds like you're contemplating sending out drafts of this ordinance.
At some point, yeah. Mhm.
Just a suggestion, it'd be certainly helpful for me
Yeah.
to see other ordinances that are already in place.
Mhm.
Especially the ones that you think are good, like Christine.
Mhm.
I don't know if any of the other ones are.
The handout at the back, or have I handed it out yet? Oh, I didn't. So I have a handout for everyone that is a link to the Castine ordinance and all of everything we've talked about, and questionnaire. And if you go to any town website, they will list their town code and their historic preservation. So you can see them. There's 20 of them. Yeah, well, hopefully, yeah. Castine's is printed out and right here, by the way. Was there another question? Yes.
Hi, I'm on the Rockland Historic Preservation Commission.
Oh, cool.
We're a couple of steps ahead of you, but we're still implementing things. We have an ordinance, you probably have looked into this. But ours, because we're anticipating resistance, our commission, our ordinance is purely advisory. We're going into it soft to kind of try and build a culture of historic preservation in town. Especially in an era of deregulation, kind of trying to ease into it instead of just running into a brick wall with everybody. And to that end, we're trying to really sell our commission as sort of there to as a resource for people, as a resource to connect with preservation contractors, as you know, are all listed on the preservation website, things like that. As, trying to connect people with code waivers, for egress windows and things like that. All of which, exist through the national building codes. You just have to know where it is, that, this window is close enough to size that you can, if you are doing a preservation project, maintain it, you can save yourself some money that way. So I would suggest, as some of these comments tonight have raised, emphasize deliverables. There's a lot of subjective talk about the marvelousness of historic preservation, and I think that people on a preservation commission naturally think that way. I certainly do, but you need to sell it to the other people. You need to explain why they should be encumbering themselves with more regulation in an era when we want less regulation. And what are they getting out? Everybody's got the same discussion about paint color and things like that.
Sure.
That's another thing is obviously to make clear to people that minor details, changeable things are not what you're covering. You're covering scale. You're covering trying to preserve what's a contributing building. We're just about to try and implement our first local historic district. Main Street in Rockland is on the National Register. But of course, National Register property only gets you protection from federally funded projects like cell towers or road projects. If you're a local district, then it would have to go through review. Now, our review process would basically mean that whoever's doing, whatever property owner is doing a project that would impact the exterior of their property in a way that would change its appearance has to come before the commission, present it, listen to us give our opinion of it, and then they sign a piece of paper that says, okay, we've heard your comments and we can take them or leave them. The only other carrot that we can give is, well, if it increases the value of your property substantially, you get a 3-year tax abatement on that change. Also, another issue in Rockland, of course, at the moment is we've just been through a big property reevaluation, which is still percolating. So people are going to be even extra sensitive. You guys have seen what the Montgomery Dam project has raised in Camden, and this is going to run into some of that same thing, obviously. So how do you bring those people in a non-contentious way? And I know you're talking about this, I'm just raising that point. Our first big meeting about Main Street designation comes up at the end of the month, and we're going to see whether that goes through or not. It's, the standard is if you notify everybody in a proposed district by letter, if more than 50% object in writing to it, no district. So we're going to see how many, people come with torches and boiling oil to our meeting or not. But yeah, we're trying to say that we're not coming in to impose upon you guys what you have to do. We're here to foster preservation. How can you do these things? How can we connect to the resources? So that's the feedback I can give you.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and I understand the kind of soft launch too. And we have been working on this ordinance, as I said, for 20 years plus. Our comprehensive plan is clear as day that we're supposed to draft a historic preservation ordinance. And I think it's time for the town of Camden to say, no, we don't want one, or yes, we want one. So we want to involve everybody in the discussion. We want to address nobody has said anything tonight that surprises us. These are exactly the same things we've been considering and discussing. So we will continue to evolve where we think this goes, and then we want to see what the town says. But it's time for the town to vote on this issue. So
I have one last one.
Yeah.
I'm very happy that you keep referring to the 2017 comprehensive plan, because I was on the planning board and I was one of the 5 members that rewrote that whole plan.
It's gorgeous.
And the chapter that you're referring to was the one that I wrote.
Oh, I love that chapter. It's great.
So I'm very happy to see.
It's more ambitious. That chapter is more ambitious than what we're even discussing here today.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Push the envelope.
Yeah, just quick. I wonder with one thing you might consider given that you are speaking and referring to increased value to the community, increased value for tourism, these sorts of things, these are elements that are visible on the outside, not elements that are visible on the inside. So when they say, I need to take these walls out, make a big kitchen, make this a big living space, change it all around inside, isn't what you really want just to maintain the exterior?
Yes, that's all this is about.
And that would be.
This has nothing to do with the interior.
Clarify that to the owners.
Yeah.
that They can renovate it.
Yeah. Yes, this is.
My next project is my kitchen.
Some of the most historic and the most wonderful parts of the whole building are on the inside, and the woodwork and the finishes and that go on. But they're not protected, and they're not, and you can do whatever you want. It's a great fun to try to get mechanical systems into existing buildings and still maintain the character. And
I think Stephanie had a question. Oh, you're on mute.
I just wanted to make a comment that I'm very pleased to see this work. And something that surprised me when my house was on the garden tour several years ago, and I did have historic information about it, people were as much interested, all the people that came, walking around an historic property than they were the gardens. And I think that supports, someone said tonight, just the overall value to the greater town, to know that people are part of and can walk on properties that have a huge sense of local history. And thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Are we at a good stopping point, or any more questions? All right, let's distribute this questionnaire. If you have time to fill it out now, great. If not, send it to us, drop it off in the town office. Here's our handout. I'm just gonna pass it around.
And we all can go right through this again in a couple days.
You did a really nice, neat takedown of 59. You really did. We were on that